What's happening in the courts when it comes to our civil liberties in the areas of free speech, parental rights, and other controversial issues? Well, that's our topic today on Significant Insights. Hello and welcome to the program. Good to have you with us today. You know, the word liberty means the positive enjoyment of various social, political, or economic rights and privileges. But inevitably, the question arises, whose rights and whose privileges are we talking about when opinions over rights conflict? For example, in a pregnancy, whose rights are more important, those of the mother or those of the baby? And that's the reason we have lawyers, courts, and judges, because in the end, they determine the legal, if not moral, answers to those questions. Well, today, an attorney with the Thomas More Society is joining us to talk about some of the legal cases that are in the courts today. A leader in the pro-life causes, the Thomas More Society is a not-for-profit, national, public interest law firm dedicated to restoring respect in law for life, family, and religious liberty. Tom Ope serves as senior counsel and co-executive director for the firm. Let's talk about the pro-life movement for a minute. On the one hand, you look at it and it appears that there has been some progress, but the Roe versus Wade is still there. I think the chances of completely reversing it it's an uphill battle, to say the least. Where is the pro-life movement today, and how are you feeling about the progress?
You know, one reaction I have to your question is that in being involved with the Thomas More Society is I'm really quite impressed at the creativity of people in the pro-life movement. Because of the Roe v. Wade, the pro-life movement has had to become very creative in terms of responding to the issue, the killing of human beings, unborn human beings. And so, for example, in Illinois, I don't know the precise numbers, but there's relatively few abortion clinics. But there's a great many, dozens and dozens of pregnancy centers that reach out to women who are in a crisis pregnancy or troubled pregnancy. So that's an example of how pro-lifers have had to deal with Roe v. Wade, and they've done so in just an amazingly creative way.
Today we're talking about no term limit. That's a long way down the road from Roe versus Wade. So where is the battle being conducted today? Is it at that point, or are we still trying to back up a bit and back to Roe versus Wade? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Well, you know, Roe v. Wade is also like one step along a more general or broader movement, really, in our culture. And so, for example, another thing that happened around the time of Roe v. Wade is in vitro fertilization techniques. So IVF came along and they had their own idea of, well, how should we think of an embryo? And so, and there was a famous case in the late 80s, 1989, in Tennessee. It was ultimately called Davis v. Davis. And in that was the one and only trial in which there was expert evidence taken on, testimony taken on when does human life begin. And there was a world famous geneticist, Jerome Lejeune, who discovered Down syndrome, who testified very clearly that that human life begins at fertilization. And that was what the trial court accepted. It went up on appeal, and the people who were on appeal, the judges, were hearing from, by way of amicus briefs from people in the IVF industry, and they reversed that decision. Scientifically, it's true, but they said, we don't think that, we think that an embryo in a Petri dish is a pre-embryo, and only after it's been implanted in a woman's uterus, in a woman's womb, does it have a human quality. So one of the things we've been doing is to fight against that concept in the law. In the middle of 2015, a guy named Nicholas Loeb came to us. He was boyfriend of Sofia Vergara, who's a movie star apparently. And he said, hey, we're fighting over 2 embryos, and which we created. Apparently movie stars don't have children. They don't want to undergo pregnancy. So they do IVF. It's a little bit like what gays are interested in doing. And they then find a surrogate to bear the child. Well, Nicholas Loeb had grown up, I think, as a Catholic, and he had some sense that these embryos, cryopreserved embryos, were special. They weren't just a piece of property or a collection of cells. So we then we filed an amicus brief on his behalf, and the case is still pending in Los Angeles, saying that human life doesn't begin when sometime later. It begins when the male and the female, the sperm and the egg combine. Immediately, there's a new human organism, immediately, within a microsecond. And we have scientific evidence to indicate that. And we're saying, hey, this has an implication to Roe v. Wade too, because in Roe v. Wade, 44 years ago, the Supreme Court said, we don't know when, science is unclear about when life begins. And we're saying, no, it's not unclear anymore. It's very clear when life begins.
So Thomas More is saying it begins when?
At fertilization.
At fertilization.
Even the word conception is ambiguous, because conception is interpreted as implantation in the womb. Fertilization is when the sperm and the egg combine.
Well, that brings up a very good point then. Today, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of embryos that are stored in refrigerated lockers in places all over the United States. And in a lot of cases, the donors have since taken one of those embryos and had a baby, or perhaps 2 babies, and they don't want the rest of them. So 2 things. Number one, what happens to those, and are those considered any form of life or simply commercial property?
Right, that's a very good question. And it's a very meaningful and significant one today, because I read in one case that there's 4 million. 4 million cryopreserved
I didn't know exactly
right
how
now.
many, but I know that it's a major problem because
right.
There's confusion, moral confusion, ethical confusion about what to do with them.
Right. So we don't necessarily know the answer, but we do know that science indicates that they're human beings, and therefore they shouldn't be treated as property. You know, we had a civil war over the issue of treating black Americans as property. You know, the law at that time was terrible. And so the 13th Amendment was passed, saying that no human being can be a slave. And so we're saying, we appeared at the courthouse, the federal courthouse in St. Louis, which is where the Dred Scott decision emanated from, back in the mid-1800s. And we said the same is true of human embryos. They are not property.
We're talking about transgender issues, parental rights, and free speech right after the break.
Back in the good old days, sex was male and female. You were either a biological male or a biological female. And now, though, there's this ideology out there that says that your body really doesn't determine that question.
Thank you for watching. The program you just watched is made possible by viewers like you. We would like to thank you for your continued support. To donate, please go to tln.com/donate or call us at 630-801-3857.
Welcome back. Today, I'm talking with attorney Tom Ope of the Thomas More Society. The firm began some 20 years ago in order to defend pro-life leader Joe Scheidler in a now famous case where he was sued by the National Organization for Women. That case spanned some 20 years and went to the Supreme Court 3 times, where Joe Scheidler finally prevailed. In part one, we discuss pro-life cases. Up next, we talk about other controversial topics like new lawsuits over transgender issues. One is playing out in the Chicagoland area in the Palatine School District.
In Palatine, there's a case of a student who has, what one would call gender dysphoria. She thinks that she is a boy and wants to use, the locker room and the toilet facilities of boys, even though she's a girl. And so the parents don't like that. And so the parents are objecting to that, and a lawsuit's been filed to essentially prevent the school district from caving in, basically, to the child and
Well, that's
her
been
parents.
going on for quite a while, hasn't it?
It's been going on for not too long, really. This whole thing has started in just the last several years. There are three major cases. There's this one in Palatine, there's one in Texas, and then there's one in Virginia. And the one in Virginia is going to the Supreme Court. And back in the good old days, sex was male and female. You were either a biological male or a biological female. And now, though, there's this ideology out there that says that your body really doesn't determine that question. Your physical body is like irrelevant to the question of whether
It's an emotional decision rather than
emotional, as spiritual. Your person decides that. It's the idea is that your freedom precedes your body's givenness. And that's the opposite of what we believe as Christians. We believe that we're created with a body, male and female. God made us.
Well, not just Christian. That's been
It's part of nature,
that's been
right?
the historical
You look at the
order of nature
exactly
since the
right.
beginning of time.
And Genesis recognizes that too.
Yeah.
It's not only revelation, but it's also something that we learn from nature. And so this new ideology it's really kind of crazy. But they're really serious about it, and they're advocates about it that essentially want human beings to be completely without any guidelines or norms in terms of sexual activity. And they can, and it's very dangerous. We think, you have to do research and read about it, but it's very dangerous for children.
What's happening with the Thomas More Society? Are you working on some of these cases now?
So we're working on some of these cases, and another implication of this is what about parental rights? That if a child or a human being has a right to determine his own sexual identity, when does that right start? And so we've gotten involved in a case in Minnesota where you can become emancipated without any notice or hearing to your parents. So what happened was this child started going through gender transfer therapy, and the mom couldn't get any information about it. They wouldn't give her any information. So she kept going to these lawyers who said, well, under Minnesota law, you have no rights. So she finally found a lawyer who said, well, let's file a suit that says that there's the absence of any way of getting notice and opportunity to be heard is a violation of due process under the federal law, under the 14th Amendment. So that case has been filed. So parental rights is an important thing. Another area that's important too is sex education. So for example, there's a sex education program in Omaha, Nebraska that says if you don't have a male sexual organ, you may not, even if you do, you may not consider yourself to be male. And this is taught in the 7th grade, or vice versa. If you have a female sexual organ, you may not consider, there are people who don't consider themselves female. And this is being taught in the schools. So parents need to be watching what's going on. So, and in Omaha, they're pulling their kids out of programs like that.
Where do you, from a Thomas More perspective, see where free speech is today in America?
Well, I've come to realize that the First Amendment is the key to our freedom in this country. The ability to speak your mind, even if it's error, and not have the government stamp down on you is a very, very important freedom, because how else will truth come out? We look at countries around the world like North Korea, for example, where all of truth is stamped out. Well, it's the First Amendment that keeps our country free. And so, there are movements that would curtail the First Amendment. One of those is the abortion area. Justice Scalia said he was very upset with the Hill v. Colorado case, which was decided in 2000, and it upheld a bubble zone law in Colorado. A bubble zone law means that there's a no speech zone around a woman walking to an abortion clinic. And he said, what is this? That we have a First Amendment that's truncated in the area of abortion. So one of the things we're doing is trying to overcome that precedent in law. There was a case.
Wouldn't you say that a lot of this is coming from the campuses? That much of the First Amendment challenge from the student movement is basically, we want free speech, but only if it is our free speech and everything else is considered hate.
When you're a true believer, you don't want to hear the opposing side.
I do.
Because you're not a true believer. You can listen to both sides, but once you're a true believer, you don't want to hear the other side.
That's called objectivity.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's very little
and
objectivity coming, at least from the public view, from a lot of the liberal culture today.
It's an interesting thing that happened in Chicago this spring. The University of Chicago said, hey, we're not going to have policies in our university that restrict speech codes. DePaul started to impose speech codes. In other words, saying, oh, you're not nice. We can't have this speaker on campus because he's not nice.
That's happening all over the country.
It's happening all over the country now, and that happens all the time. I mean, it's part of human nature. And the important thing is for the government and the Supreme Court to say that the government cannot impose those restrictions on speech. And for people to appreciate then, as a result of that non-government entities should not impose speech codes. So that's one thing that's very important to fight against, a robust First Amendment. We were involved in a case in Lake County just earlier, it's just over with this fall, where a guy from, this is an example of what I was talking to before about creativity. His name is Mark Harrington, and he has an organization called Created Equal. And so he found out that this company called Stericycle is hauling away all the aborted fetuses and tissues of Planned Parenthood. So he said, hey, we should shut down that company. It's a boycott, right? And then maybe we can shut down Planned Parenthood. So he found out where the owners of that company lived, which was on the north side of Chicago. He came in with trucks and did all kinds of, showed aborted fetuses and pictures of the people who were running the company. And so they turned around and sued him. And we represented him in a case up in Lake County, and we were totally victorious. Why? The First Amendment.
You know, I'm really glad that the Thomas More Society is fighting against those who would try to curtail free speech. The firm offers its legal services pro bono for people who cannot afford legal fees. It's funded largely by donations from those who understand the importance of its mission. You can find out more about the firm by going to thomasmoresociety.org. Final thoughts on loving your neighbor right after the break.
Paul's got it right. Without trusting steadily in God, it is nearly impossible to hope unswervingly and love extravagantly. But isn't that what we all want?
TLN is a donor-supported station, and programs like you just watched are made possible by viewers like you. To donate, please go to tln.com/donate or call us at 630-801-3857.
It's vitally important to fight for the rights of the unborn and to strive to uphold God's values in our country. But in this striving, we cannot forget that Jesus told us to love our enemies. Love is the centerpiece of Christianity, and it should be reflected in everything we undertake. Marilyn Siden, past director of Today's Youth Matter, talks more about this in today's Final Thoughts.
When I was younger, I used to grab hold of any controversial issue and have an opinion about it. I've marched for peace, I've marched to save the whales, and I've marched to save the salt marsh mouse. In my older years, I find that old saying is really where I want to be. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. When I look to Jesus, when I have a controversial question, I realize that he rarely talked about the stuff that divides us today. He had two things that were pretty important that he wanted us to get. First, love God with everything in you. And second, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. That's what I'm working on now. And when I get those two things figured out, I'll go back to the other issues that I remember from my youth. In the chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, the last verse recited so many times, in Eugene Peterson's The Message translates it, trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly. Trusting steadily in God, that comes to bear when I am at camp with a group of kids and you're in the midst of this unbelievable chaos. And you don't see the end that God sees, so it's my job just to trust God to come through with as only God can do. Hope unswervingly. In Ray Johnson's book, The Hope Quotient, he says that the only thing that can really turn a life that's upside down, right side up, is hope. And that's what we really hope to give to our TYM youngsters. Love extravagantly. We've all been to those potlucks where at one end of the table is this most delicious, incredibly just smelling perfectly, this lasagna that someone made from scratch, and it's gone in 2 minutes. And at the other end of the table is this bowl of Jell-O, usually green, with one cut up banana in it. Extravagant love is what takes time sometimes. My favorite extravagant love story is of a elderly woman walking through the park, and she comes across a homeless guy about ready to eat his dried up, who knows when it was made, peanut butter sandwich. She says, do you want to pool our resources and eat together? And he said, sure. And so she pulls out puts her picnic basket down, pulls out the tablecloth, covers it with her fried chicken and homemade potato salad and fresh squeezed orange juice and hummus and veggies and of course a still warm apple pie. And then she takes out a china plate and puts his peanut butter sandwich on it, cuts it into 4 pieces, blesses the food, and you know what she ate first, of course, the peanut butter sandwich. That's extravagant love. Paul's got it right. Without trusting steadily in God, it is nearly impossible to hope unswervingly and love extravagantly. But isn't that what we all want? Don't we all want to just express that this could be impossible kind of extravagant love and hope and trust? So today, I'm asking all of us to trust steadily in God, to hope unswervingly, and to find a safe way to express extravagant love, which after all is the greatest of these.
Thank you, Marilyn. We appreciate those words. A couple of things I'd like to point out here. One is that we're living probably in one of the most mean-spirited times that I've experienced in my lifetime, with people being absolutely uncivil toward each other and unable to really sit down and carry on an intelligent debate and discussion about the issues. And I think that's unfortunate. But one of the things that I do think is important as Christians is that we follow the commandment of Jesus, where we do love our enemies, and that we, in all of our disagreement and in all of the things that we have to say about the issues, whether they're political or cultural or whatever they are, that we do it in the context of who we are as Christians and understand that the Lord has called us really to love and to be civil about how we handle our relationships with other people. And I think probably that's one of the most important things that I can think of today as Christians in an uncivil culture. We can reflect the love of Jesus Christ by being civil and really caring and being sensitive about the feelings and the needs of other people. Thanks for joining me. Good to have you today. God bless.